co-author book, which was awarded the prestigious 2023 Academy of Management George R. Terry Book Award. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Dr.Erkki Karo.
Thank you. I assume this is now my turn. So thank you all for hosting me. It's a pleasure to be here in Bangkok and especially at NIDA. So as was said, my background is a bit broader than public administration. I come from a department where we deal with two topics, innovation and governance, and how they get interrelated. So one side of this is really about sort of how do you build well-functioning public administration systems that use technology, but also contribute to the development of technology. So we basically deal with public sector innovation, including digitalization, but also public sector innovation policy regarding support of private sector development and so forth. And today, I was asked or invited to give you a talk about Estonian government's evolution in the sphere of digital government. So what I will do is I will have a fairly detailed presentation of the historical evolution of Estonian digital government system, but also I will derive lessons for public administration. So it's not a technical presentation, but it's about how do we govern these processes and what we could actually learn from the history of Estonia, but also looking forward, because we in Estonia started dealing with digital government in early 1990s. Globally, we started to deal with digital government in 1950s and 1960s. So we started on a journey, jumped on a bandwagon of digitalization actually, and today the train is still ongoing. Digital government never gets ready. Digital government is actually about being able to modernize itself and develop further. And today in Estonia, we also feel that we are actually at a crossroads again, because the technological logic, the mindset that we had in 1990s was built for one reality. Today, through AI and other technological developments, we are kind of questioning whether the old mindset and the old technologies are still valuable or they are actually blocking us. Maybe the digital government of early 90s is today considered a bad bureaucracy, if you can call it like that, because it's outdated, it's slow, it doesn't adjust to people's expectations, and then the question becomes, how do we then kind of reform or change that, right? And my presentation basically has an outline. It's 3 lenses that I have. So first of all, I will do more or less like a historical overview of key events over the last 30 years, how Estonian system developed, and reflect on the debates, lessons, challenges we have been facing and what we can actually bring it today. But my point that I want to make mostly is that I want to highlight how actually digitalization and digital transformation processes are also influenced by the local context, values, and preferences. And this leads to different models or paradigms of digital transformation. So oftentimes when people come to Estonia, they get amazed of things that are happening in Estonia. And I will talk about the amazing things that people think are amazing. But whenever I come to Southeast Asia, I get amazed by other digital things, not necessarily maybe public sector related, but the way the digital society works. So for example, to be honest, like last year I was in Kuala Lumpur for 2 months. Now I'm in Bangkok. Whenever I come here, I give all my money to Grab, right? So there is a super app that solves my life. And then I walk on the street and I see that even small street vendors can accept digital payments by phone without having any digital payment receiving systems themselves. In Europe, that doesn't work, right? So for me, this is a totally amazing, different kind of way of doing things, right? And the experiences form our way we want to see also stuff happening in government, right? So if you would have a super app in Estonia or in Europe, similar to Grab, we would assume that why isn't our government, digital government, like a super app? Because in private sector, we get the benefits of this kind of super apps. So I think public and private elements often come together, creating expectations about digital society, but also expectations what should be the role of the government and how that should be arranged. So this context really is something I want to emphasize. The second thing, last thing, the conclusion I want to make or the message I want to convey is that you need to keep this context in mind. You need, when you develop the digital governance solutions, you need to keep in mind, you need to be aware of it, right? So that there is always some legacy in your systems and you need to be able to cope with that. And I think one of the key tasks here for public administrations when we talk about digital government policy is to have a general broader idea, vision of where are we going with digital government and maintain this over technology hype cycles. Because today everybody's talking about AI. 3 years ago, everybody was talking how blockchain will transform government. Nobody talks about how blockchain transforms government by now. So if you want to build a sustainable digital society, you need to have a vision and capacities to be ahead of technology curve and on top of that technology curve in the sense that you are able to actually have a kind of a broad view of this thing and also to kind of select or understand technologies and see where do you put them and how do you use them. And this is, I think, one important element here. But anyway, so this is kind of the outline of the messages. We could even now stop because I've said the messages I wanted to say, but I have the slides and the presentation that has this historical view and how do we get this kind of lessons and conclusions. And how we're going to do is that I have kind of certain blocks in my presentation or in my talk. And whenever I go through a certain stage, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and I will take them at the moment because I see in the chat when you have put some questions and reflect on this, or we can just raise them also orally in the moments, but I will notify you when you could ask questions from the previous moments. Now, some definitions, some assumptions before we go forward. So I will use quite a lot, I guess, the term digital transformation. And I just wanted to clarify what I mean by that, right? So it's not about adopting technologies only, or we don't talk about the latest technologies, but it's more broader kind of change in mindset as well of how do we actually think about what is the role of organizations, what is the role of certain services. So it's about technologies, a capacity to adopt better technologies for better outcomes, capacity to rethink and redesign ways of working because digital transformation, the assumption behind there is that it's not only technologies, but technologies have certain modalities that will also influence the way we think, the way we behave and stuff like that. And you need to kind of keep this in mind as well. So it's the soft and the hard, right? So it's the brain, the thinking and the technology side. And then, as I said, capacity to govern technological change. So some people in this context would argue even that, you know, there has never been digital transformation of government yet, because we have probably talked about technologies and how to adopt the latest ones, but we haven't really thought about whether and how and if technology should also change the ways we think about what is the role of the government and how it functions, right? But if you want to have these two things together, you would probably see much more profounder changes than just having new technologies in the game. And this is the kind of baseline from where I come, right? So on the way here, I was listening to a podcast, a recent podcast by the Estonian government chief information officer. And he's basically argued that digitalization or digitation as a process is a one-off process. That you actually take some analog activities and turn them into digital form, right? But digital transformation is something that is always ongoing because new technologies, new expectations, new opportunities come. If you have brought certain activities from analog world to the digital world, it's not the end. It's only the beginning. It's almost like, you know, public sector modernization in analog world. You always need to improve things, right? So here is the same. Digital transformation is a continuous process, right? Just a few background stories of the Estonian case, because why are we talking about the Estonian example? So Estonia is a small country. It's like a district of Bangkok, 1.3 million people, 45, a bit more land probably than Bangkok. But it's in Western Europe as a small country. And why everybody talks about it is that part of our own digital transformation journey has been about making Estonia bigger to the storyline of digitalization, because this is something unique that we have had. And we have moved in this process to actually make the country bigger through digital transformation. This is either by allowing other people to use our services when they come to European single market, or actually sharing our technologies and skills globally and stuff like that. But pretty much it's a small, very little country in the corner of Europe, which is important for the peculiarities that I come back to later. Second important element here is that when we talk about digital transformation and stuff like that, is that Estonia always has kind of had this kind of storyline that we are one of the few success stories in the world. So there we do quite well in some of the statistics, some of the benchmarks. But if you look at it, this is a slide from a government official Estonian digital transformation storyline, right? And if you look at what do we say as part of our e-Estonia story, is that it's not only about digital government and services, but it's also about their impact on the ecosystem, right? So we look together at whether our services are online, how good we are at e-participation, or how good we are at digital economy indexes and stuff like that, or cybersecurity. But the other side is also we look at it whether we are actually somehow competitive in the world through our overall public administration system. So it's not only about improving the public administration internally, but also having an external impact in terms of economy and stuff like that as well. And when we talk about the digital government, so this is basically some of the storylines that are part of that story, right? So according to the official government service, in the last elections of the Estonian parliament in 2023, 51% of votes were casted online. So half of the people who went to vote did not really go to vote. They stayed home or wherever they were. So it's a big kind of chunk of an activity that used to be very traditional analog activity is now become digital. The government claims that 99% of our services are available online. So you can always guess what is the one service that is not online, or you cannot do digitally. We can do this as maybe you can put it in the chat or something. So people say from digital government, there is one thing you cannot do in Estonia in an online format. Can you guess what it is? No, buying cars, selling cars and stuff that can be done. You cannot get divorced online. You can get married online, but you cannot get divorced online. But the government says we are fixing that. There is a legal regulations behind that and stuff like that, but that's the only thing you cannot do basically. 99% of Estonians have electronic identification one way or the other. And 70% of them use it regularly, either for analog identification or digital identification. So more than half of the population is connected online if needed and stuff like that. And the graph on the right up corner is that we have also built actually our e-government system and opened it up for non-Estonians. So we have a system called the e-residency where foreigners can apply to become a specific format of digital resident without democratic rights, most of them, but having access to certain public services to start companies that can operate legally in the European market, for example. So we have about 27,500 companies being established by non-Estonians to this digital platform. And this is the example of this kind of outside impact or outside effect that we are looking for and discussing as well. And this is basically the background statistical story of here. But going further a bit here is that we also basically emphasize, we're already starting with the e-residency, that it's not about just digitalization, but it's having sort of quality of life or economic impact as well on site, right? So Estonians we sometimes organize competitions how quickly somebody can start a company online. So it's under 3 hours. The fastest people who have done it many times can do it in 15 to 20 minutes. But it's basically, if you decide in the morning to start a company and you have all your e-documents and everything ready, you can own a company by the evening and already run transactions, stuff like that. e-taxation, and so forth. So basically, it's also very much about ease of doing business, having a comfort in services and stuff like that. But I come back to that a bit later. And the second and the last thing I want to see as a background here is that the e-Estonia story is never discussed without the story of digital society or digital entrepreneurship, as we call it as well, and so on. And this is part of the history that, in our case, the development has been very much sort of infused and happening in a public-private partnership mode. That a lot of our public services have been developed by private contractors, but the platforms being developed are also used interchangeably. So you use the e-identification not to only access government services, but also to private transactions, access your bank account and stuff like that. And that gives leverage to the digital government solutions and technologies, because you can use them actually in real life more often than just having to when you are in contact with the government. And this kind of symbiosis between the digital economy, the company startups, and the digital government, this is a very important kind of foundational element of the system, but I will discuss this a bit later as well. So this is basically the backstory, the backline of this. So if you look at it, you know, we have some of the largest number of unicorns in Europe per capita. Most of them are in the digital society space. We have 99% services online and so forth. So some people would argue that the Estonian digital government is ready, right? But the storyline here that I want to say is that it's always a part of the process, and we need to kind of always have capabilities and capacities for modernizing the system and going ahead with it. And this is where the context, the traditions, legacies come into mind, and that's why I want to give in the next parts some sort of a historical lesson drawing and future outlook as well. So, okay, skip this one, right? So in the next slides, I have basically categorized the story of Estonian digital government into 3 periods: 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s, 20s. You know, life is always like easy, like that. History is easier to categorize than the present. So, you know, the last period is always fuzzy, never ending, and not well defined. But basically, when you look back, then the early 1990s, you could argue that this was basically digitalization, digital transformation was happening hand in hand with state building. And the main focus for many people was the question of efficiency. As a young country, you have limited resources, and you need to figure out what can you do and where some sort of digital solutions come to play. And again, keep in mind from the beginning that Estonia did not invent digital government or digital transformation. It was already happening around, right? And we just happened to build our state at a certain period when digital transformation was emerging globally and so on. But the main sort of ideas that we can actually take from there is that so the certain principles of developing things was about frugality, because you didn't have enough resources to buy the best data sets from Microsoft or SAP or something like that. You had to figure out yourself what to do, where to go. Part of the storyline was as well that as in early 1990s, Estonia became independent again from the Soviet Union. You were building your state institution from scratch. So you didn't have legacies. Technically, you had legacies, historically you had, but as a state, you could actually, in this window of opportunity, define your own kind of model or approach further. One important element here was that actually, and this goes through from the beginning to today, is that Estonian digital government has been always built in a decentralized fashion. What it means is that services and activities that are being either digitalized or new technologies are discussed, they are owned and developed by line ministries, Ministry of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Social Affairs, and stuff like that. And they are in charge of that. And it's their task to figure out how digitalization or new technologies help them in this process or not. What the government has been doing is has been trying to coordinate, as I mentioned, this vision, this direction, and trying to actually give guidelines and trying to keep the picture together. And originally, this was actually mostly done under the Prime Minister's office. So in early 1990s, when the Prime Ministers came to office, some of them had fairly tech-savvy advisors and stuff like that. And they said, okay, state building, let's look at IT as well and so on. So the first information agencies and stuff like that were all under the Prime Minister's office and as a coordination units. And their task, their job was to basically be a storyteller. They would go to different line ministries, agencies, and say, think about this, try to convince this, and so on. As we go through the history, we say that there were some success stories in this process. And in 2000s, this actually led to the realization or emergence of understanding that actually we have so many systems now. Everybody has been developed their own systems and stuff like that. Now we need to make it work as a government. And this when interoperability, some sort of institutionalization in the sense of let's have rules, regulations, standards, common understanding and stuff like that, as well as, okay, we have so much stuff online, we should focus also more awarely on cybersecurity came to play. And that's part of that story, actually. You know, it's about more traditional way of doing things, right? It's more about governing it in a traditional public administration sense. And this is the moment where actually that coordination activity was given away, more or less away from Prime Minister's office. And it was Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, which at the time was actually called Roads and Communications. So it wasn't the designated IT ministry. There was much more roads than digital roads at that time, right? So it was actually a ministry dealing with infrastructure. And they were given also the task to start coordinating these kind of activities. And they started to build information agencies that develop data sets or the architecture and stuff like that. But this is where traditional kind of administration started to emerge in this process. And this actually led to kind of institutionalization of e-government as it is today in Estonia. And I will talk about this as well later. And then in 2010s, 2020s, we have probably, you know, maturation of the system, or, you know, the system becoming, I guess, less boring or less exciting and more boring as well, because it's about maintenance and management and stuff like that. Okay, we have the system, people use it, they rely it needs to function now. So we need to maintain it. You know, services need to be up to date. You cannot have too much lag on getting access to things and stuff like that. You know, if people use their ID cards to get prescriptions, then who gets most medical prescriptions? Pensioners. When do they actually get out their medical prescriptions? During the pension day. So if they all go to the pharmacy to get to the prescriptions, then the IT system better work. Otherwise, there is a lot of unhappy people and stuff like that. So this is not anymore about building a system, but maintaining, looking for the scale of it and stuff like that, and trying to figure it out. But then, you know, especially in the late 2010s, we get also the kind of citizen or service orientation into the mindset that we should actually not build system structures and infra, but we actually learned that, you know, you need to have services that people use in order for the system to be effective and useful, right? And then again, increasingly as I go through that, we started to feel that, okay, there is so much new technologies coming to play that we need to actually have some sort of policy or understanding about what technologies we should work with and what we shouldn't, right? And was largely this process as well was coordination and policy was led by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications. By that time, infrastructure was not that big. Economics was the main name by now. But also some of the new initiatives that needed political support, because again, when the system becomes about maintenance and management and standardization, it becomes also bureaucratic turf fighting, right? So certain activities were again at times coordinated, initiated, led by the Prime Minister's office to give some kind of political visibility to that. And once something was getting mature or other priority domains became relevant for government to push centrally, then the digital topics were again sort of given to the line ministry, right? Because we all need to keep in mind that the Prime Minister's office has a limited capacity and attention span, and they cannot do sustainability, digitalization, and whatnot all together, but they always focus on one or two or three key topics. So we have seen some topics going to the Prime Minister's office and then given again back to the ministry, not because they were ready, but sometimes because, you know, it was already, change was on the way, snowball was moving, it was picking up speed, we could give it away. Sometimes other priorities would come, whether it was national security, sustainability, that took the attention away from the Prime Minister's office. So, but there is a pragmatic need in some kind of policy leadership in this. Anyway, so this is kind of the periodization. And now I have some examples of how this actually functioned and worked out and some lessons to draw. So one of the things when we look at Estonian history is that there is a timeline. If you go, there is actually a website, e/estonia.com, that has basically a very good overview of the storyline, videos and stuff like that. And there is a storyline of this and the arguments that are being made about how this system was made. Now, one of the things I want to emphasize here is that I think is as with many innovations and also many public sector innovations, in hindsight, we often tend to over-rationalize these things. So Estonians, when they look at our digital government, say that, in early 1990s, we were poor, we did not have enough resources, and then we came to the realization that digital is cheaper and we can use that to actually have. Probably wasn't like that, because originally digital is also very expensive to get computers, to that stuff, but you had a window of opportunity. Some ideas, some concepts emerged. There were networks of people pushing it, advisors and stuff like that, and things were picked up. So Estonia resumed independence in early 1991. And as I mentioned, under the Prime Minister's office, there was a few committees and councils and funds being set up. So we had information fund that was basically financing digital investments. We had a committee that was looking at the vision and stuff like that. But if you look at that history back, this was all made kind of as an innovation that was not part of planning and policy design, because most policy documents were framed actually years after action started. So in 1991, we had committees, we had funds put together and stuff like that. But the principles of Estonian information policy, which would be a document you assume that guides these activities, was only drafted in 1994. So in many domains in Estonia in the early 90s, because of the moment, we saw that actually things were happening in a very informal space. The same was, for example, with universities. We had universities that were coming from Soviet era. We became independent. The universities still functioned. They still had programs. They were still funded by the government. But the law of universities was adopted in 1996. So for 5 years, we were actually legally operating in an institutional void, but we managed. And this kind of informality, this kind of ability to push things through was an important starting point. So I wouldn't argue that this was based on a policy, but I think it was more about vision. It was more about a few charismatic actors close to the politicians, whichever level you have them, were pushing this idea. And you start even with small increments to get things going and get some first wins, some first kind of visions in this process. I think that's one of the early elements here. And I think that continues throughout. In 2015, for example, Estonia came up with e-residency. Again, a new government initiative. It was very different from previous things. We opened up our government services, digital services to non-citizens. It's a very fundamental decision, and you would assume that there is politics behind it, political decisions, guidelines. But when people actually start to discuss, so who came up with the idea of e-residency, then nobody agrees because everyone thinks that they did, which is again an indication that it's more about action than doing first plans and stuff like that, but getting some ideas out, some visions, early kind of initiatives. And then once things kind of prove themselves, you start institutionalizing them and so forth. Maybe the most important sort of digital society element from early 1990s is this idea that we should have a Tiger Leap initiative. So tigers, you know better tigers than we in Europe, but the idea is that tigers jump very far and go very fast. So at this time, people understood that we should actually speed up our digitalization activities across society, and we had a nationwide digitalization campaign, which was basically about IT infrastructure development. So bringing the basic IT infrastructure to public spaces, schools, public libraries, and stuff like that, to actually have people connected online, or at least have access to go online. Because without that, you build systems, but they are very discriminatory to the people who have access to internet. We don't have this worry today that much anymore. Everybody gets access to internet via mobile phones in much more easier than you would have had 20 or 30 years ago. But we had this like a very large scale program, which was again kind of designed, drafted based on some visionary leadership or thinking. So some people say that it was like 2 or 3 people drafting it together at a hotel, drinking whiskey and coming up with a vision for the economy, and then going to the government to pitch this to different agencies and stuff like that. I am myself like a child of that Tiger Lead program. So I was at high school that time, and I remember computers being brought to the school. And we didn't have curricula that had IT class. We just had voluntary classes after school to actually touch a computer and learn how to program and stuff like that. I liked basketball more, so I went twice, and then I went to gym. Other people liked it more, and they stayed coding and stuff like that. But this was part of this building awareness, knowledge about the technology to people and stuff like that. And this is by now, I guess, resulted in people actually assuming that internet is available everywhere and can actually use it and stuff like that. But it started in early 90s, took 10, 15 years actually to get it critical mass reach. But again, certain important element this process. For the actual kind of realization of how digital government solutions are actually being picked up in Estonia, as I mentioned, one of the crucial elements in Estonia has been that digital government solutions have almost never been developed in isolation. They've been always developed in conjunction, in cooperation with private services, which means that for example, first e-banking services, the banks developed first digital banking services in Estonia, very rudimentary. You had passcodes and stuff like that on paper to log in, but they were developing at that time. The banks were Scandinavian banks, and they were the largest IT companies in Estonia, and they were using the same lack of legacy opportunities to develop digital solutions in Estonia, and seeing whether people would pick them up. But the idea was partly to make it more available, to make it more cheaper, and so forth. But one important element of these services was that they were developed eventually in cooperation with public services. So very quickly, within a few years, what happened was that you could actually log into the bank service with the same login systems that you could log into the government. So you would use the same login, you would use the same ID card or whatnot as an access to the banking service as well. And this is important because there is statistics in Estonia that says that on average, an average Estonian has a contact with public administration. Guess how many times a year? 3 times a year. So you don't actually go to the government. You get some pension, you apply for pension, you apply for benefits and stuff like that. But you really don't you go to doctor, but that's not public administration. But really with government sort of central bureaucracy, you rarely have contact with as a normal person, which means that if the government develops services that you use only 3 times, you don't really take them seriously. You don't invest into getting yourself an ID card or whatever thing, and you don't actually rely on this. Today, this would be even more visible. For example, think about if you would have a government app on the phone and people use it only 3 times a year, Apple would delete it constantly from your phone because you have, for efficiency of the mobile operating system, unused apps get deleted. So imagine that the system would delete always your government app because you're not using it. And in order to actually people download it and use it, it's better if you have some sort of private services linked to that as well. At least this was some of the understanding originally in Estonia. This, of course, led to the actually co-evolution of 2 services, right? So you basically went to the bank online to see whether your employer paid you money. And first of the digital public services that you would do was you would go and give your money away to the government through taxes, right? So income and outcome straight away. So one of the first public services that was really online in Estonia, it was the e-tax system. So you could actually report taxes online and get it done. And it was already in 1999. If you don't have any, and it's based on pre-filled data. So the bank, which was digitalized, pays you out salary. and report straight away the income taxes and stuff like that to the tax office, right? And linking these databases, what would happen is that tax office already knows your regular income and can pre-fill how much income tax you have paid, whether you need to get paid more or whether you get something back and so on. So if you didn't have regular income, irregular income, you could do tax filing in 3 minutes, basically. Just click yes, all good and go. Now, one important element here, again, the uniqueness of the context, why this system works so efficiently and why this is the most loved technology in Estonia, I guess, is that we have a very universal tax system. Flat income tax for the most of the time, no tax exemptions almost and stuff like that. So everybody's treated equally. So yeah, basically it is easy to automate. There is no family-based allowances. There are no family-based, very few things that you could actually do. And if they are, they're also standardized. So the government can just say that, okay, you have a child, you get this. But not that your income is below a certain threshold, so your child allowance is bigger. We even have child allowance. If it's paid, it's equal to everybody, regardless whether you're a billionaire or a poor person, you still get the same amount or used to get. And this enabled you to do this efficiency, right? So if you don't have that kind of efficiency, you cannot do these things that easy, right? But in our case, it was really this kind of merging of these public and private elements that enabled us to actually kind of have this kind of services being picked up. But this is a very European thing as well, I would say, that the tax systems are the most digitalized things in Europe in many countries. And the logic, some countries don't do it, but in many, and the logic really is that you have mutual interest in this. People would want to get money back if they have paid extra, and the government would like to make sure that they get money fast enough as taxes, right? So this is something that many countries in Europe tend to start from when they digitalize and so on. But in our case, it was really about this two things together. And this was actually also the pickup of digital solutions happened together. So for example, there are statistics has been made that we had digital identification systems and ID cards and stuff like that. But the stuff really got picked up by citizens when the private sector did not allow any more other identification solutions. So for example, we used to have you could log into the government with ID card and you could log in with bank logins to the bank. And the banks gradually reduced how much money you can actually transfer with their login systems. And every time they reduced the amount of money you can transfer with their login, pickup of ID card went up. So if you had the public and private use cases together, then the technology of solutions start to pick up. I'm not saying that this has to be like this nowadays and everywhere, but this was our logic, and very strongly that you had to make sense that the solutions work for the people on a larger scale. And in 2000, this really kind of resulted in this kind of first institutionalizations and activities, and the taxes were the beginning of really digital solutions. So you had a decade of building infrastructure, building access to the digital space through the Tiger Leap programs and stuff like that. And only then you started to see these kind of technologies. So this is, I think, and then one side was really about doing things that make sense to citizens, right? That we do taxes. This is the most common thing that everybody uses. Even if you don't have income, you still report taxes more or less. And the other side was really doing something also politically visible, right? So in 2000s, also, for example, the government went symbolically to e-cabinet meetings, which means that whenever government would meet in a similar table, they would have the documents already pre-available on the computer, so they could, when they drive to the meetings, they have worked through the documents and stuff like that. The logic originally was, let's reduce papers and be more cost efficient, but later also let's speed up. So the assumption is that when you go to the meeting, everybody has read the documents and you can just decide. You don't have to introduce, but you can just decide. Reality probably is that government meetings have also become more superficial because nobody presents, nobody reads, and people just decide, right? This can also happen as a downside because we don't really make sure that people read through documents. But anyway, so that was the logic. But the political visibility of these things was as important for the legitimacy of the digital transformation as was actual services on the ground and so on. But again, to sum up, this period was very much decentralized. So different government agencies coming up with solutions. This wasn't a plan that taxes is something we do. This emerged to this decentralized process. And we have done interviews, for example, with the people who were developing these technologies. And one of the guys used to do a PhD with us, who was kind of one of the architects of the Estonian e-tax system. When we asked him, how did you succeed in coming up with this kind of solution? Because this was breaking bureaucracy's habits, going through very strong processes and stuff like that. He said that, okay, my boss allowed me to make mistakes and took all the blame. Was his first argument. Said, but I said that cannot be it, because a lot of bosses protect their civil servants, but still you don't get the success out, right? And then he said, okay, I forgot. As a head of the person in charge of building the e-tax system digitally, I was also in charge of doing the legislation for that. So the technologist was doing the legislation. So this was actually put together under the same umbrella, and that allowed you to actually have this kind of very quick system on the market. Whether that is good or bad, in many cases, this could go really wrong because you don't have checks and balances there and stuff like that. But part of this Estonian storyline was this kind of very agile approach that somebody had a mandate to develop a system, but that mandate was not only technological, but it was also institutional, and you had the legal basis, right? Nowadays, we cannot do this anymore. We have separated this task much more. There is more ethical concerns. There are more kind of value-based concerns in place. So you need to have these processes differently. But the early beginning was very much built on these kind of experiences, let's put it so. Would you want to have questions here? Because this is, I think, one of the elements that I want to stop now and go into the more kind of recent periods. Somebody has questions on this?
So was there any policy diffusions took place? That's why the country has suddenly from 1991 and then part of within 10 years, you have transformed a lot and you did a lot. So was how the digital government policy has been diffused from somewhere?
I think yes and no. There are some elements here that may be worth emphasizing. First of all, I think we need to be honest about Estonian as well, is that, for example, when our university became 100 years, we made videos about what is the role of our university in developing Estonia as a success story. And the digital story started in 1960s. So we actually had in Estonia, when we were part of Soviet Union, we had our own research and development. It was the Soviet cybernetics, and which was all about sort of information control and building systems and stuff like that. So our mindset of the people developing technologies and thinking about the future, that came already from 70s, 80s, 90s. So we were always aligned with technology, right? But it was the Soviet version of IT, basically, right? Early 2000s was, okay, we don't like that anymore. We want to look at Western technologies. And West was all doing, we were already slaves of IBM and stuff like that in most of the Western world, right? So private technologies being introduced and stuff like that. But the logic of Estonia was we didn't have funding for that. We didn't have money. We wanted to do it, but we didn't have money to buy stuff from SAP or from and so on. So the idea was, let's develop something on our own. So we had this kind of view that this is happening in the world. We had this kind of constraints that we cannot copy, buy the best technology in. Even aid money wasn't there for digitalization, but we have our own skills. So we actually used our own historical skills and researchers and stuff like that to build the system. So in that sense, we had ambition that we were emulating, but the development of the system was our own. And this leads to some very, I think, important things in the second part of this process as well. Because if you think about it, the Estonian e-government system is like super centralized. You need to have ID cards. Like our former government CIO said, if you don't have a digital ID card, you cannot build a digital government, which is the Estonian version of this, because you cannot build the version that we have, which I will talk a bit later now as well, because it's very centralized eventually. Not centralized, but it's very reliant on this kind of state-led certain key elements, the infrastructure of data layer, X-road, digital infrastructure, and all these things. But we have societies where having a government mandated digital ID card is considered Big Brother. And you cannot have this politically. And you still do digital government, so you do it just differently, right? But we actually, I think, emulated the ambition. We saw what is happening in the world. We had some tech-savvy advisors and stuff like that who would say that, look at this and stuff. But the version we did was what was available with our own capabilities and resources. So we merged these things together. And then in the process, I think we just, like innovation as well, learn by doing, right? You go through this process. And one of the benefits was, I think, this decentralization. That basically you had different agencies running their own experiments, ideas, what to do this in this information space, because the government was mandating that you should invest something into IT. So what you do. Then we had some success stories like e-tax, which in the later periods we started to scale more or make it more like a standard. So I think, it's a half of the answer, right? There was looking at the West, trying to go there with the qualities and stuff like that, but having your own context and reality that keeps in mind. If you now fast forward to the future, that's our problem now. Because if you think about all new technologies are much more decentralized. And if you say that our system is built on registries, ID cards, state mandated stuff, and so on, databases, AI would say, we don't need that, right? Or whatever, web free or something like that. So we are now doubting, debating whether this legacy technology that we have now is good or bad, and how do we get out, right? I hope I answered a bit your question. Any other question? Yep.
Hi. So from hearing an Estonian history of evolution, I feel like, oh my God, I just wish my country can have the same experience. And for my question, with just over 10 years from the 1990, from the 1990 to e-cabinet in the 2000 year, that it's a big, like a revolution in e-technology, e-service in Estonia. So how could the government shift so fast, and what is the main key to drive this big shift? Thank you.
I think from that period, there is two elements here, right? One e-cabinet, because as I said, Prime Minister's office was in charge of this. So they need to also show something, right? And, what is our view of how government works? Meetings, right? So the whole idea basically behind that was, let's make meetings with computers and it looks futuristic, right? To be honest, right? It had some elements. So you have this kind of symbolic things there. But what made it, I guess, possible again was this combination of having this view, keeping it, supporting it, having constant discussions in the government, asking from Prime Minister's office, different ministries, through the information committee and stuff like that. What are you doing? How far are you going? And stuff like that. And then at the same time, having these kind of decentralized attempts to build this thing, right? And then, because if you think about, the success story we have is we have meetings with computers, but it has a symbolic meaning. And then we have one of two or three services in that period, like tax that was really picked up, because we had in other places like attempts to build data systems and stuff like that, but we still did things on paper and stuff like that. Schools had computers, but we didn't have, like I remember when I was in school and this stuff came, we had, when I was in the last 3 years of the university, we had an IT guy, some IT, where the IT guy of my school was also part of government agencies dealing with IT. And he wanted to do dynamic scheduling through IT solutions to computer, which meant that, you have on one side, you have classes with numbers of seats, and the other side, you have students who want to take courses, right? And his idea was that, let's try to use computers to make scheduling more efficient and more effective, student-friendly, putting in variables to have this. What it meant was that we had a new schedule every week, and by Wednesday, the head of teaching had to do it over manually because we always discovered some bugs, right? So we were, testing, learning on the go, but we had some success stories. So I think it's a combination of having this kind of vision and then a few experiments that work. And in the middle layer, you have this kind of preparing society, because through the Tiger Leap to this digitalization program, you also create expectations. Okay, you all talk about this technology, show us the results as well, right? So I think that time, 10 years was very fast. Nowadays, 10 years would be very slow, right? So you need to keep this in mind as well. Yeah, okay.
We have a question from home.
Yeah.
So I think someone's too shy.
Okay.
So, so how did the government back then mean 1996, encourage private sector, particularly those in finance and banking, to launch digital services? And if I understand correctly, so we definitely need the effort from both the government, right, the cabinet. That's why there's establishment of the e-cabinet. But then I think you stressed the importance of the engagement from the private sector. So how did you boost such encourage?
Yes. So the private sector engagement happened through two lenses. One was very simple. We couldn't, as I said, we couldn't buy from IBM because we didn't have money. So we had to procure from local developers. So I have done interviews with Estonian large IT companies, their heads. And so that's how was in the beginning. He said that it was very boring. Our job for the first tens of years was that we actually were building databases to, for municipalities to register dogs and cats and whatnot, right? So doing very boring things, but this enabled us to build companies. So the government was actually procuring a lot of services because once you decide to build digital systems and infra, you need to build it. You don't have the capacity internally, you procure it. So a lot of small Estonian companies emerged through these procurements. And later they became the main partners in designing future as well. So some of the largest IT developing companies, now that that's also export technologies, they emerged through this kind of government as the largest procurer, right? So it was, the idea was, build versus buy. So build together with private sector things that you need locally because you cannot buy global best practices. So this is one lens, how you bring in the private sector very strongly here. Well, we brought in, and the second with banks was Estonian bank. We had one Estonian bank, but by early 2000s already or something like that, or a few more, the banks were privatized to Scandinavia or sold to Scandinavian investors. So until today, we have 5-6 large banks. Only one of them is Estonian, and the rest are Scandinavian banks. And what actually happened was that the Scandinavian banks were interested in developing digital solutions, and they used Estonia as a cheap IT labor as well, partly, but also as a place to experiment and develop. So IT was moved in. But over the years, I mean, if you do Tiger Leap, if you give the political visibility of this, then the banks, because the banks are also the bad guys, right? Like the government. Government taxes you and the bank gives you a loan and then actually asks money back, right? So both of them are taking money. So the bank also partly needs to kind of, be visible on a legitimate space as well, right? To do something good. So they were working together with the government on this digital society initiatives as well. But part of this was also that they were actually interested in having people access banking through digital systems. And once this idea of government providing safe and secure login to the digital services came in, then the banks said, maybe we can save money if we shift from our own login to a common login system with the public sector. So what actually happened was that some of these agencies that help you to, for example, certify certain ways you log into the government are actually publicly and privately owned and financed. So Estonia had this kind of certification center that would look at whether the ID card or whatever mobile login system is secure. And it was originally jointly established by public and private sector actors to have this kind of capacity there. So it became kind of mutually beneficial. That's, I think, the main thing here, that you can bring them in on this high level if it's mutually beneficial. It's partly symbolic, but it needs to have the use value there.
Thank you. That's very clear. Last question from home again, and then we could move on to the next. The tax filing. So this one is a government effort, of course. But back then, did you keep some space for paper filing? Does still exist?
Yeah.
And what about these days?
Sorry?
Are there any paper filing these days? Next question, I'm just going to go ahead and ask, and it's related to tax filing. So even back then or even these days, even you still do paper filing, do you sort of do carrot and stick, right? So like carrot, you're giving them reward by if you file it digitally, then you get the money within 2 or 3 hours or a day or two. And then if you do tax filing by paper, then it's probably going to take a week or two.
Yeah.
Did you do the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, how it works is that, yes, I think you can still do taxes on paper if you want to. You can go to the tax office and ask for the pre-filled and check it and change it if needed. So you can do this like this, but the government has the date. Basically, you have the date. Now, how we do it is basically, I'm going to do it in February. So basically, I go to my bank, to where I get paid, because most Estonians, we also get paid through banks and stuff like that. So I check what data my bank has collected that is tax worthy, and I approve sending of this data to the tax office. Then it takes about 5-10 minutes. It's pre-filled into the system, and then I report the taxes, right? So, and this has been always working like this. You can do it on the site, on the paper and stuff like that, but it really is that it takes longer than. If you do it on the online, I think it's 4 or 5 days that the payment comes. I'm not sure as it's improved, but it's never been hours. It's been always 4 or 5 days, because you submit it and it needs to be still quickly checked, and the payment order needs to be made and all those things, right? You can pay yourself straight away if you have to pay extra, but you cannot get money back. But there is like several of different processes in this pay, but they go through mostly through the bank. So the bank, if I, for example, pay for my children's education, like they go to swimming, for example, and if the swimming club is registered as a children's swimming club, then all the payments that I make to them, my bank qualifies as something that I can get tax deductions. So it's not only salaries, but all this kind of activities. If I do an extracurricular language course, I can get, again, for income tax deductions and stuff like that. But yeah, the point there is very much about sort of the logic of it was it's easier, it's pre-filled, you can do it. You get money back faster and all these things. And this still works like that, right? But I think by now, nobody even considers doing it on paper because, people are used to that. So there are still some people probably who do it by principle, but not many. Okay, I propose now to move to the next. So 2000s, as I mentioned, was basically where you had some services, some infrastructure and stuff like that already ready. So the government actually changed a little bit the logic or the mindset. One was moving away from the Prime Minister's coordinated activities to more Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications. But what you would see is that we actually start to build, the understanding was, okay, we have enough of these different services, but it doesn't work as a digital government. It works as digital tax. It works as digital whatever thing that social affairs does. You can apply for a permit digitally somewhere on the road administration website, but it doesn't really work together. So that was the understanding that in order to have a digital government, if it has been developing so decentralized, you need to have some sort of centralization of functioning things. So this is where Estonia basically understood that we need to integrate these things together, right? And what we did is we built basically, it's called X-Road. So it's a distributed data exchange layer for registries and information systems, because the entire government, when it was doing it originally, was about registries and information systems. Everybody was developing that, but in the specific ministries. And now the idea was, but let's put them working together, because only then you can get digital kind of government that's functioning on a whole, right? So that actually the school information is shared with the medical stuff and hospitals and whatnot, right? And for this, basically, Estonian government then relied again on in-house development of technologies, more or less. So we didn't have anything to pick because we had already started our own technology in the 90s. So we continued this. And it was basically the idea that we need to have also not only on a policy level, the integration through coordination, but also on a technical level integration to some kind of technological means. And this was basically gradually built again. So again, Estonia, when they presented, so we have X road and all the government agencies are linked to stuff. That didn't happen like that in the beginning. Some people in the development of the system understood that we need to start putting data registers to work together. But they didn't impose on all government agencies that you should do that now by 7th of June or something like that. But they worked with the willing. So getting some use cases to work, getting some of these data to work together to show that it's beneficial, to show that it's useful, and then gradually scaling this up, right? So what we are talking about basically, and here is also where you see on the picture how, for example, telecom companies, banks, state portal, databases, whatever different agencies come together on this platform, right? So this enables you to have the tax office and the bank communicate to each other and stuff like that. But the main point of this is that we didn't build a common system, or we didn't have like a ministry of registries that pools all that, went to the different agencies and give me your data, we will put it centrally. We built a layer for the different registers to talk to each other and share data. So that if somebody wants to offer a service, they pool data from different places, but the data is owned, maintained, and securitized basically by the agency still, right? So basically, this is the technology backbone that was developed. Today we talk about population of 1.3 million, but X-Road having data transactions on the scale of 2.5 to 3 billion a year. So there is constant kind of flow of data going between stuff, but it's about doing queries from one data set to another. There are more than 3,000 services that run on this system and stuff like that. But again, it emerged from developing technology and then trying it on a smaller scale in the beginning to make sure it works, and then gradually scaling. And this has been also one of these ideas or attempts that Estonia has tried to also export. So this is where actually the X-Road technology and stuff like that was developed in cooperation with companies. And now your question comes, why would companies want to work together with government? Well, actually, they are developing a product and the government helps you to export it, because whenever there's somebody's interested in Estonian e-government and they are introducing a particular technology, they are also pitching for the companies. Because it's not that, Estonian government can sell you X-Road. Estonian government can say, go to these companies and they will build it for you. And when they do their trade fairs or whatever, the government and the private sector always go together and kind of pitch these ideas. And this is still the collaboration there again. But again, this is our own technology, right? So in other countries, if you don't develop the technology, you cannot really do this because you're buying it and stuff like that. And you need to have much more technology capability within the government to be able to actually ask for the technology as well as control and monitor. And as part of that, in 2000 space as well, then we had this idea of this kind of understanding that in order to have a common approach, we have to have common infrastructure, but also common identity system, right? This was Estonian version, as I mentioned before. So we basically introduced the digital identification and digital signature system. So so that people can actually, access the public and private systems together, and we made it compulsory. So you need to have either passport or ID card in Estonia, and its ID card is cheaper to get, and you can use it as an identification on the street. But you can travel within Europe with this passport. You basically need only to come to Bangkok. You don't accept yet our ID card, right? But yeah, this was basically also something that was kind of built and scaled in 2000s. And this enabled you to actually start doing these examples of sync, like tax office service and stuff like that, and scale the practice across services through a common experience. You can log into whatever social affairs with the same login, to the banks, to the tax office, and all those things. Before, it was much more distributed and so forth. So it looks like this. Electronic ID is compulsory. 64% today use it regularly. But by now, we have moved away from this, right? So I never use my ID card. I think I have it somewhere. I only use it as an identification document because it has all Estonians, when they go, they need to show you So this is I have ID card. This is the electronic version of this, right? So there is the chip. You can, you have readers. In Estonia, you can actually buy computers. You used to be able to buy computers with built-in ID card readers. You put it in and you use it, right? I don't use it because I have a Mac, and the Mac and the Estonian ID systems don't work together. Every time there is a Google or Microsoft or Apple does a security update, for a few days, our digital system doesn't work because for large companies, Estonian version is so small and unique that they don't consider that when they develop security updates. And we always have to ourselves analyze what is the kind of clash between the systems and propose them. Can you kind of revise this for our access and stuff like that? So what I do is I use mobile ID. So in Estonia, you can get basically, we tend to have long-term mobile contracts, so we don't buy call cards or something like that. And you can get a certified SIM card. And I sign documents, I log in and stuff like that through mobile ID, which gets me a PIN code and stuff like that. And that's not also the latest technology, because we already have a problem with that. Like whenever I come to Asia, I need to get a local SIM card, right? So I need to have two phones nowadays, because one is at home I only use it. I have like a very old iPhone. I only use it to put in the PIN when I need to sign something or log in some stuff like that. But when you go already for the eSIM, then suddenly the Estonian structure stuck, because we want you to have a certified physical card in it, right? But most people use already either this or even Smart ID, which is an app-based approach, right? Where you actually need to kind of certify your phone once, and then it's kind of approved through the app and stuff like that. But basically, we all use this for daily operations, to log into somewhere, to the banks, to sign documents. So digital signature in Estonia is not PDF where you put your signature in, but it's actually digitally stamped, and you use one or the other documents and stuff like that. So as a head of department in my university, I think I don't use the government services 3 times a year, but I think I sign about 50 documents a day or something like that with that. So, or something like that. But this is another part of the system that we built. And this is still core of our system, that everybody has the unique identification number that actually pools your data from different places. So all your data in different registers is linked to that. So when you go to doctors and something like that, or you go to the pharmacy, they actually, people think that there is something secret on the card or something like that, but it's your personal identification number through which different databases the pharmacy can ask from the hospital, do you have a recipe or not? And then they get only that, what recipes or what is the right to ask in the hospital, right? And as part of that, again, once you have scale, you look for services. So one important element that we did was iVoting, but I would skip this at the moment because I think this is just a unique particular element of Estonia, which is about symbolic thing, because this is some of the things that we want to say that this is the most unique about things, but it's very difficult to convince others to go into iVoting, because fundamentally that boils down to trust in government and systems, right? So, and how have you built this? And this is something very kind of unique to Estonia, that we basically, through having an ecosystem of other services around that are built on the same technology, people are willing to do iVoting. So basically, people can have a very simple question. Well, I trust my money through mobile ID. Why can't I just trust my vote to that as well, right? So if you have linked other personal experiences that are also related to trust to that, then you can do also iVoting. But I think many countries still look at it and they cannot unlock that trust question. And part of that is whether you don't have enough of a scale of services and habits around that to do it also in the democratic deliberations or whatnot. But this is our version of this. And then in 2007, 2008, we started actually to say that, okay, we have interoperability, we have the registration systems, we have technologically homogenization, but then started to happen also questions of security by natural reasons, because if you build so many things around, if you integrate them, then the risks are going high, right? If you have 17 different services with 17 different logins, one password gets compromised, one service gets compromised. If you have it with one, then everything gets compromised, right, very quickly. So this is where cybersecurity concerns came together. And this was actually very much overlapping with external sort of crisis as well. So in 2007, we had a little bit of a conflict with Russians, and they had a very strong attacks on Estonian e-government. And we had basically for weeks DDoS attacks on Estonian government. I was at that time living in Belgium, couldn't read news, couldn't get money out and stuff like that. So Estonia basically had to lock its digital space in order to protect it against external attacks. But after that, we actually had a very strong emphasis on making sure that the system, once you have built it, integrated, becomes kind of secure as well. And this is where one of the elements of technology comes to play, right? So Estonia always says, we were dealing with blockchain before blockchain became blockchain. In the sense that already in 2008, actually Estonian government, again, together with companies developing services, developed this kind of security layer. So it's called KSI blockchain, which is the kind of Estonian cryptographers, again, coming actually, the company that developed that and in collaboration with others, they all have this kind of technology legacy from 1990s and even from before. So they use the skill, this experience to build a custom blockchain-based security system for Estonian government. Now, this is not that Estonia has all data in the blockchain. No, we have still databases, but we have blockchain-based kind of supervision of this, right? What it's meant is that what is this thing is that basically it's control on the data. It's not that the data is secure, but basically you can put a timestamp on the data and you cannot change that. Right? You can still access the data, you can still hack the databases, but you cannot change the data within some stuff like that because through this kind of KSI blockchain, they are able to actually kind of have the timestamp and they can control who is accessing and using this data. So what it is basically, it's a technology that has been developed by Estonians, but it's also used, for example, by NATO, US Department of Defense. So again, a technology that we use locally, developed for local purposes in collaboration with private sector, but we are able to sell it also, or the company is able to export it. Not all of the government uses it. Again, it's a decentralized system. Some of the government agencies have decided to use it in ministries. We use it from some of the registries, but not necessarily for all. So we try to have the most sensitive registries covered with that, but we don't try to again say everyone should do it. Again, in order to have innovations on the space, you work with the willing or you work with where the pain is the biggest. Because this is how you actually progress, and then you give through learning by doing, you help others to pick up and stuff like that, right? So maybe there was something I wanted to mention here, but yeah, so basically we don't, some people think that, okay, you have all the data there or something like that. No, it's actually sort of, layer, security layer for the registers. But then this was again already a little bit emergence of question of, what do we do with the high technologies, right? And how do we work with this? So Estonia uses it in a very narrow meaning, right? So we had discussions, for example, when Bitcoin became a thing, whether we should have our own digital currency, Estcoin. We had a thought about it, we left it. We said, okay, we're going to use the technology of blockchain for our needs and purposes, but not how it's, the fad saying that, but we actually tried to figure out how we actually can make sense of the technology for our purposes and not just putting it everywhere. To sum it up, I guess, is that you actually get into this kind of three pillars of the system when you try to pull it together. So you have this kind of confidentiality, you have this kind of secure access to the system through the e-identification system. You have availability of services and stuff like that through the X-road layer. And then you have the security provided, and you need to have these layers together because you don't really want to have in early stages some data leaks or something like that, and then deal with this. So Estonian government is very strict on this. So for us, for example, this kind of security of the system is a paramount, that whenever there is a case that somebody has managed to hack a system or something like that, the government does a press conference where one of the ministers is available. they talk about details about how somebody hacked the system or something what happened, and we got pictures of people or something like that. But it's never sort of hidden under the cover, but it's made very politically visible because, as I said, voting is reliant on this, tax office, medical records, and all these things is reliant. So you need to kind of make sure that always the visibility and taking it seriously is there. And we always have, and it's been in recent years that you see that it's never just technicians talking about it, but there is always a political commitment to deal with this and maintain trust in the system, right? And this period then saw kind of scaling or emergence of these solutions and nationwide systems. So e-health systems, for example, became integrated through these technologies as well, because personal data again becomes very important here. So we had e-health system in 2008 and so on. And e-prescription was 2010 known. So it took 10 years again to build sort of usable. So basically e-prescription is the most used service in Estonia. So everybody almost uses it, but also the e-health portal. So for example, I have in my phone access to all of my visits to the doctor from last 15 years. So if I would need to go to the hospital in here, I can, it's in Estonian. It's not machine translated or anything, but there are still some Latin words, which means that your doctors would understand what has been happening with me recently. The same with my kids. I can access my kids and stuff like that. And we have this kind of access to this. But this became one of the kind of main, I guess, also layers of uses as well. But you get these services into the daily practice of people as well, and so on. For the sake of time, I would probably include here also the storyline of the 2010-2020s, and then we can take a few questions. So after 2010s, you can argue that the system had these pillars, it was put together. And then we actually moved into even more boring period, right? So maintenance and management of the system. So what happened is that the more you integrate this thing on different layers, policy vision, technology layers, and stuff like that, the more complex the system becomes. And the less you see the things that I mentioned about the story of the 1990s and early 2000s, less symbolic action by small networks and stuff like that, but more traditional development of digital government. What I mean by that is that even our own government website basically stops talking about new solutions coming to the market, but talks about policy documents on it. So this is where traditional policy making comes in. You have set institutions, you have government agencies, ministries, coordination processes, infrastructure standards. In order to change all of this, you cannot just go to talk to two people and say, let's build a new layer. You need to have a policy planning coordination process. So we started to actually write policy documents, basically, and planning cycles. So we had public services green paper, basically arguing that, okay, we have 10 years ago, that we have developed this system, it's getting old. We need to start figuring it out how to change it, right? So we had documents and stuff like that coming up. But the whole idea was that we should move into this kind of idea that whenever we do something, it's digital by default. So we don't anymore digitalize things and stuff like that, but now the system is ready, but we need to take this kind of digital default mindset into play. So even the most kind of odd things you can think about, going fishing during Christmas, Estonians like to go themselves to the forest, cut a Christmas tree. By standards of law, you should have permit for that. So you can do this by phone, in the car, by mobile app, notification to the forestry agency. I'm going to this forest to take 2 trees. And then it comes automated response. Yes. If you took 3, you get a fine. If you took 2, you're okay. If you go fishing, you get a daily permit online and stuff like that. But the idea was that, everything that we have should become digital by basically default. And then the system was mature. We didn't really change much in early 2015s, but what we did was new developments that we managed to push through was actually to open the system to the world, right? So on the one side, we had the e-residency as a system that we pitched and came up with, so people can have from abroad limited access to the government services, and that brings also income to the system. So what we actually are doing is we are making money with the digital system to some extent because we are offering platform and services. We did, I will a bit skip on this as well, but you can ask me later if you want. But basically, we calculate that it's about 200 million euros until now by just having access to already existing systems that brings profit or some turnover back in terms of taxes being paid by the companies established. We started to think about digital security from a different lens. So we have data embassies. So critical Estonian databases are backed up by a data embassy in Luxembourg. Again, geopolitics next to Russia. If something happens, then the state can function even if there is an invasion or something like that. So this is a digital era security concerns. Again, it's not only about protecting your systems from digital attacks, but also physically and stuff like that. We started to work together with a consortia because a lot of Estonians move around. We have digital single market. So we try to build that our digital system connects to the countries where most Estonians live. So for example, we build joint initiatives with the Finns because we have a lot of work commuting, healthcare commuting and stuff like that. So building an interoperability layer between countries as well in order for us to actually have tax offices share data because people might be working in two countries, have health systems share data because if people work in Finland and go to the doctor there, then half of your medical history is in another country. How do you do this? So we had a lot of this kind of internationalization in this. But I think what is more important for today's discussion is that we actually started to realize that this kind of very original system that we had, digitalization of registries, linking them and having services built on that, is getting outdated because people experience in digital society other experiences when they go to private sector apps and stuff like that. So we started to talk about the idea of seamless services. So we have kind of proactive or automated services. So this is the current kind of attempt of our digital government is that, okay, forget this, that people go and get stuff digitally. Let's actually offer people things proactively. So the idea we have is basically certain activities that people would normally have, that the service that comes from the government becomes proactive. Not that you go with login and ask stuff and so on, but when you log in, government knows certain information about you. You got a child, you have proactive offer of these services you could have, right? This is the list of the services our government is trying to turn into proactive stuff, starting a business, childbirth, and stuff like that. And this is one of the crucial things of digital society here now. Who decides what are the services that citizens want in 2020? Is it the government? Is it the citizens? Or is it Accenture, right? So what happened is that when Estonian came to the idea that we should work with digital government, then and proactive services, then we looked at what are proactive services and we saw that the consultants are trying to figure this out. But actually they had a view of 10 services, right? Then the Estonian government took these 10 and started to figure out some others and so on. And then they started to kind of put things together and see what is the service you want. But you have this legacy element here is that we still do it by our history. We think that this is the services that people want or this is the services that people experience. And we didn't really do sort of ground level analysis of what is actually the service people in their life event need, right? So for example, and then this is where, like, for example, anthropological research would say that we have built our governments with starting assumptions in 1950s, 1960s, that this is how life works. And then we try to digitalize this, and now we try to make this proactive. But is it actually the life the same as we want? So for example, one example, what is going to pension? This is something that people often want to kind of digitalize. Is it about getting out of the job and being happy and having a lot of free time? This is the assumption that we tend to have from history, that this is what people work for. You get to pension, you start getting pension, you get from revenue side to the cost side of the government, but you get happy. The reality is actually people get anxious because if you go to pension, you lose all your work friends. You don't know how to actually live without working on the right side. So actually going to the pension as a service might actually be also counseling, psychological help, not only just we will offer you pension and this is your, community service you can do, but maybe you need counseling and stuff like that. And this is a step where basically in many countries you would argue that you would need to start rethinking from this digital transformation mindset. What are the services of digital age that the government should be providing? Don't just put together things that look nice and easy to put together, but they should be actually something else, maybe. So critical reflection on this stage might be very crucial. And this is something in Estonia, we see that technology people don't want to do it because they would want to do it as easy as possible. Let's try to integrate whatever we have and through as proactive as possible. Designers, anthropologists would say that we should go on a stretch and try to figure out what it is. So one example of this, I think, is I think I don't have I have accidentally deleted it. But one of the examples of this service is, for example, childbirth. So I had my first child was born in 2019. I had to do it all digitally, but manually. Requests for kindergarten place, request for this benefit, request for this benefit and that benefit. My second child was born in 2022 when the service was proactive. Then as soon as I registered, notified government, I have a child now. And the child has a name, which I had to register the name, I think. Then they offered, and as an ID code by that, they offered me the list of services. What do you want and what do you want to get? So I didn't have to go to like 7 different data sets, registers to ask for this service and that, but this was offered. So this is the idea of proactiveness. But there's still, debates or questions whether everything is covered or whether we should be rethinking these things. And maybe last sort of important elements here to emphasize is that we basically went through already in 2019, our Estonian government came up with the first government AI strategy. Because this is where people started to realize that artificial intelligence has its next coming. It wasn't when ChatGPT came to the market, but it was 4 or 5 years ago we started to do the strategies and visioning the future when AI will get more mature, right? Today we are doing a new strategy already because we were thinking about stuff to 2030, but today the government realizes that our assumptions in 2019 were not in line with the technology possibilities of 2024. So we are doing a new strategy or rethinking of it. But we are actually getting into the stage where we are again at the point of radical technological change, right? So AI is not registers-based and stuff like that, but it's totally different. So how we are again approaching this is a very decentralized fashion. Government strategy says we are trying to think about AI for economy, society, businesses. We are trying to figure out what could be the potential use cases, but we are not prescribing that every minister or agency should have these and these things on AI. We allow, again, for this kind of decentralized experimentation with technologies within, again, a common vision of where to go in the future. So we have certain services that are where, again, use cases are most visible. And this is, again, an attempt by the conscious attempt partly by the government to support getting quick wins and early wins in order don't go to the most complicated things, but get early wins in order to get the ball growing so that people within the government and outside the government could see that these technologies might be useful or not. So maybe, some examples of this would be, for example, the last on the right scale here, based agricultural registries and information board. Basically, in Estonia and the European Union, we give a lot of subsidies for farmers to do sustainable farming. And giving subsidies means control registries and stuff like that. We used to have people going to the fields to see whether, the grass is being cut as it's supposed to be and stuff like that. Today, we use satellite data and AI to predict whether between the days satellite flew over, there has been cutting of the grass or not. And then the machine tells to the civil servants where to go and do manual checks and stuff like that. So we try to use these things. We don't try to say like, AI will do straight away teaching in high schools or something like that. We try to get the quick wins in order to understand what are the potential use cases of these technologies. And then maybe last thing that I want to mention here is that, for example, we are not anymore shy of emulation and copying. Our early period was building our own technologies, our own solutions for the particular system we have and particular capacities. Now, when our own capabilities are already mature, our own original technologies are becoming legacy technologies to some extent. we are not shy of actually copying or emulating or borrowing from other countries. So for example, at the current moment, we are developing a mobile government app, basically like a super app of government. And we are basically very blatantly relying on the Ukrainian mobile system called DIA, partly for symbolic reasons to support Ukraine during the war and stuff like that. But basically, we are taking over the technology and approach to offer app, basically. So, and the main first thing we do is that we are actually trying to digitalize our ID card. The original thing that we actually developed and invented ourselves. Now we are basically using someone else's technology to make the ID card visible on the phone so that we get rid of all of this kind of digital SIM cards and stuff like that. But we had for 10 years discussion whether we would want to have mobile apps. And the original logic was that we don't want it because people get the same story that people will not use the app. Now we realize that basically maybe we need to do it because of the underlying technologies changing so much with AI and all these things that may, and also that SIM cards and stuff like that are disappearing from phones. We need to have an alternative identification. But this is very much where for 10 years we said we don't really do it. And in 1 year we decided let's do it and let's copy a technology. And we did a testing of these things and so on. And we are only now doing an map. So for a long time we decided to build registers and stuff like that. And now we are going to more modern approaches. So to sum up, I think I want to make a conclusion here about the Estonian digital government paradigm of these kind of key elements here. All right. So digital-minded leadership on whatever level of government that it is. As we saw, we have had it in different layers in Estonia, but you need to keep the vision there. You need to keep this kind of political direction on it. So it has been Prime Minister's office, it has been Minister of Communications, but somewhere somebody keeps a vision, a view of it. It doesn't have to be necessarily a strategy, but a storyline and narrative that is kept in society through symbolic actions like M-government or whatever things. Digital by default by now. So we actually developed new stuff already with the logic that it should be first digital from the digital mindset. So the proactive services could be an example of this. No legacy principle. That's something that the Estonian government has tried to introduce. So we have even some kind of informal rule that no database or code should be older than 13 years. But you need to be pragmatic on this. If it works, it can also stay longer. But you need to revise it at least every 13 years or something like that. But this is an original idea of having something no legacy principle, once only principle, which is the idea that you shouldn't ask people data twice. So when you meet a person and they want a service from you, whether analog or digital, government should first ask itself whether we know the data about this person that we want to before we ask from them. It doesn't have to be absolute, but if at least critical infra databases should be connected in order to actually make this more efficient so that we don't ask from the people 7 times a day, what's your address when we know it, right? Or how many kids you have when we know it, right? And so on. Another element, as I mentioned from early beginnings, is build versus buy. So the idea that we have been building the technologies together with private sector. And that has enabled us to actually build customized approaches. If you cannot do that, you cannot learn much from Estonian system. Because other countries, other systems will be very different. And if you rely on private sector providers or super apps or something like that, you cannot learn technologically much from Estonia. But I think what is actually important, or what you can actually, like from a PA side, learn about this Estonian system that we have been pushing is this decentralized ownership of services and digital stuff. Every ministry is doing their own things. But critical coordination in the beginning of views, visions, but also system standards designs, right? Originally, we started with systems and with the interoperability that we should coordinate them. Then we started to do service standards that people, even if you develop your stuff separately, people should have the same feeling for the government. Otherwise, they will be unhappy. If tax office gives you a response in 3 days and the road administration says we will answer you in 3 weeks, people will be unhappy. You need to have certain quality of standards fairly, not always the same, but fairly understandably the same, and the design experiences as well. Originally, Estonian government had a really bad design. You would go to the different government agencies and you wouldn't find anything. Nowadays, we try to have this kind of user experience that comes together because people otherwise don't find things and stuff like that. Because if they're used to having, going to one government agency and having one experience and suddenly go to the other and it's totally different, they will be very unhappy about these things, right? So I think these are kind of the principles. Some of these are technology ones. And I would be saying that these are not absolute but pragmatic things, right? And others are more PA side. So the leadership, the way you balance between centralization and decentralization. Because if you want to do everything centrally, then you basically need to take over both analog and digital services, right? And run them centrally, but trying to do this. And I think just to finish, so it was mentioned also in this is the last slide before, that I think we make the argument here that digital transformation actually is not very different from innovation in general in public sector in the government. And I think one of the main things is that in order to have a sustainable digital transformation approach, you need to be both agile and stable at the same time. And what I mean by that is that you need to have some sort of long-term vision, understanding values. What is the digital government about it? Is it about efficiency? Is it about customer services? Is it about having nice, convenient services? Is it about having cutting-edge technologies that complement private sector or whatever it is? But you need to keep this in the long term because this gives you the direction, but at the same and allows you to be systematically agile. That you don't, because if somebody says you need to be agile, then it's very easy to run after every technology fad that comes. All government to blockchain, all government to Web3, every civil servant should have their own avatar or whatever, technology hype to come. You should rather have a few and then you're able to actually govern or be on top of the technologies and be kind of reasonable in selecting what to work with. And this is, I think, a balance that you need to strike, right? And this also leads to, I think, to certain sort of last three bullets here, lessons. Be pragmatic about legacies. You cannot be legacy-free forever, and you're never legacy-free. But you need to know your legacies and you need to know how to manage them, right? Rely on something that still works. Try to cope with things that, go ahead against future developments. Focus on services that matter to people and get used, because then you actually get the traction in society. And that also technology capacity matters quite a bit. So you need to be ahead and on top of technology fads. AI is around now. It's the 5th time AI is around in the history of technology in the last 70 years. So how do you treat that? How do you actually make it useful for yourself? Not that just take it, whatever is there, but how do you actually understand its value in your society and stuff like that? And I think this is kind of the elements I would emphasize. Sorry that the last part went a bit over time, but I finished now and I can take your questions over there as well.
Before we are going to the Q&A session, may I wrap up in Thai? Okay. ค่ะก็เมื่อสักครู่นี้นะคะอาจารย์ Professor Erkki นะคะได้พูดถึง Digital Transformation ในเอสโตเนียนะคะก็เป็นประเทศที่นำเทคโนโลยีมาใช้ในการปฏิรูประบบราชการเนาะแล้วก็การให้บริการสาธารณะนะคะก็เริ่มตั้งแต่ต้นทศวรรษ1990นะคะก็จะมีทั้งในเรื่องของ e-Estonia นะคะบริการที่เกี่ยวกับการลงทะเบียน starting business นะคะการเสียภาษีนะคะ e-voting นะคะ e-health นะคะ X-Growth เนี่ยก็เป็นอีกระบบข้อมูลเนาะที่เชื่อมต่อกับข้อมูลที่เอสโตเนียใช้ในการเชื่อมโยงข้อมูลระหว่างหน่วยงานภาครัฐแล้วก็รัฐกับประชาชนด้วยนะคะรวมถึงการที่ประชาชนทุกคนในเอสโตเนียเนี่ยมี Digital ID นะคะที่จะเข้าถึงบริการภาครัฐแล้วก็ธุรกิจด้วยนะคะ ทีนี้เนี่ยสิ่งที่น่าสนใจอีกอันหนึ่งนะคะที่ Professor Erkki ได้พูดถึงก็คือเรื่องของนโยบาย Tiger Leave เนาะอันนี้ก็เริ่มต้นในปี 1996 นะคะก็ให้ความสำคัญในเรื่องของการปฏิรูปการศึกษานะคะแล้วก็มีเทคโนโลยีมาใช้ในเอสโตเนียนะคะเพื่อที่จะพัฒนาสังคมเศรษฐกิจนะคะผ่านการใช้เทคโนโลยีแล้วก็การสื่อสารนะคะ Tiger Leave เนี่ยเน้นในเรื่องของโครงสร้างพื้นฐานที่จำเป็นนะคะเข้าถึงแล้วก็ใช้งาน เทคโนโลยีในโรงเรียนทั่วประเทศนะคะมีการเชื่อมต่ออินเทอร์เน็ตความเร็วสูงนะคะแล้วก็มีจัด infrastructure ต่างๆด้วยนะคะแล้วก็มีการเพิ่มทักษะ ICT ให้กับนักเรียนและครูนะคะตรงนี้เนี่ยก็เป็นตัวกระตุ้นสำคัญที่ทำให้เอสโตเนียเนี่ยกลายเป็นประเทศที่มีการใช้เทคโนโลยีอย่างกว้างขวางนะคะจากนั้นเนี่ยมีการพัฒนาในเรื่องของ e-tax นะคะ e-service ต่างๆนะคะมีการใช้ยื่นภาษีออนไลน์นะคะทำเพียง3 นาทีเท่านั้นนะคะแล้วก็มีการคำนึงถึงในเรื่องของ Cyber Security ด้วยนะคะที่น่าสนใจอีกอันหนึ่งนะคะก็คือมีการนำระบบ e-cabinet meeting เข้ามานะคะในการปฏิรูปดิจิทัลของเอสโตเนียมุ่งเน้นเพิ่มประสิทธิภาพความโปร่งใสในการทำงานของภาครัฐนะคะก็เน้นในเรื่องวิธีการประชุมของคณะรัฐมนตรีนะคะเอาดิจิทัลเนี่ยมาใช้เพื่อลดการใช้กระดาษแล้วก็ปรับปรุงในเรื่องของการตัดสินใจนะคะเพิ่มความโปร่งใสนะคะมีการประชุมแบบไร้กระดาษนะคะแล้วก็ทำงานร่วมกันแบบเรียลไทม์นะคะก็จะช่วยให้สมาชิกคณะรัฐมนตรีเนี่ยทำงานร่วมกันแล้วก็เปลี่ยนแปลงเอกสารได้ตัดสินใจได้อย่างรวดเร็วมากยิ่งขึ้นนะคะนอกจากนี้เนี่ยนอกจากมี e-tax แล้วเนี่ยเขายังมีระบบ e-tax board ด้วยนะคะก็เป็นแพลตฟอร์มออนไลน์ที่ให้บริการด้านภาษีทำให้กระบวนการทำภาษีเนี่ยราบรื่นรวดเร็วแล้วก็มีประสิทธิภาพมากยิ่งขึ้นนะคะ ทีนี้เนี่ยไอ้ตัวที่น่าสนใจคือน่าสนใจหลายอย่างเนาะ Explore ก็เป็นสิ่งที่น่าสนใจอย่างที่เกริ่นมาข้างต้นนะคะก็จะเป็นการเชื่อมต่อแล้วก็รักษาความปลอดภัยในการแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลระบบฐานข้อมูลต่างๆของภาครัฐแล้วก็เอกชนด้วยนะคะระบบนี้ก็เป็นหัวใจสำคัญในการที่จะเปลี่ยนผ่านสู่ดิจิทัลของเอสโตเนียนะคะแล้วก็เป็นรากฐานที่สำคัญที่ทำให้เอสโตเนียเนี่ยสามารถให้บริการดิจิทัลแบบบูรณาการและก็มีประสิทธิภาพได้นะคะ ถัดไปเนี่ยจะเป็นในเรื่องของการใช้อ่า e-voting นะคะมีการเลือกตั้งออนไลน์ทำอย่างปลอดภัยแล้วก็มีประสิทธิภาพนะคะเอา blockchain เข้ามาใช้ใน integrity verification ตรวจสอบความถูกต้องนะคะก็เป็นกลไกที่น่าสนใจในการที่จะรักษาความโปร่งใสและก็สร้างความน่าเชื่อถือในระบบดิจิทัลด้วยนะคะรวมถึงการเลือกตั้งแบบออนไลน์ e-voting อันนี้ก็เป็นแนวคิดที่น่าสนใจเกี่ยวกับในเรื่องของ digitalization ข้อมูลใน blockchain ก็จะเอามาถูกใช้ที่ไม่ให้เกิดการใช้แบบรวมศูนย์มากยิ่งนักนะคะถัดไปก็คือเขาก็มีการดำเนินการในเรื่องของตัว Public Service Green Paper นะคะก็เป็นเอกสารที่ภาครัฐเนี่ยออกมาเพื่อเสนอความเห็นแนวคิดข้อเสนอนโยบายต่างๆนะคะ แล้วก็มีเป้าหมายก็คือสร้างในเรื่องของการรับฟังความคิดเห็นผู้มีส่วนได้ส่วนเสียต่างๆรวมทั้งประชาชนด้วยนะคะในบางกรณีเนี่ยไอตัว Green Paper อาจนำไปสู่ในเรื่องของ White Paper นะคะอ่ะ Data Embassy นะคะก็เป็นอีกแนวคิดหนึ่งนะคะที่มีวัตถุประสงค์เพื่อเข้ามาในเรื่องของการรักษาความปลอดภัยแล้วก็ความต่อเนื่องของข้อมูลนะคะ Data Embassy เนี่ยเขาจะเป็นศูนย์สำรองข้อมูลที่สำคัญของภาครัฐนะคะเพื่อให้เกิดการกู้คืนข้อมูลแล้วก็ระบบการทำงานในกรณีที่เกิดเหตุฉุกเฉินขึ้นมานะคะ proactive government นะคะอันนี้ก็เป็นรัฐบาล proactive เนาะก็เป็นแนวทางการเอาการบริหารจัดการภาครัฐเน้นการให้บริการและก็ตอบสนองต่อความต้องการของประชาชนอย่างรวดเร็วแล้วก็มีประสิทธิภาพโดยไม่จำเป็นที่จะต้องรอให้ประชาชนเนี่ยเข้ามายื่นคำร้องหรือว่าแจ้งปัญหานะคะตัว proactive เนี่ยเขาก็จะมีบริการที่ให้ข้อมูลทางเทคโนโลยีแล้วก็มีการเชื่อมโยงข้อมูลต่างๆนะคะการทำนายความต้องการนะคะเขาจะรู้ได้ยังไงคือเขาใช้วิธีการวิเคราะห์ข้อมูลแล้วก็พฤติกรรมของประชาชนนะคะทำนายความต้องการของประชาชนแล้วก็ปัญหาที่อาจจะเกิดขึ้นล่วงหน้าได้นะคะ นอกจากนี้เนี่ยในระยะหลังๆเนี่ยมีการนำเอา AI เข้ามาใช้มากยิ่งขึ้นเพื่อสร้างสังคมและรัฐบาลที่ชาญฉลาดด้วยเทคโนโลยีนะคะไม่เพียงแต่ปรับปรุง รุงคุณภาพการให้บริการภาครัฐแต่ยังสร้างโอกาสใหม่ๆในการที่จะพัฒนานวัตกรรมนะคะและก็เสริมสร้างเรื่องเศรษฐกิจและสังคมและล่าสุดเนี่ยมีการพัฒนาโมบาย ID นะคะหรือว่าตัว MRIIK นะคะก็เป็นระบบที่ให้บริการยืนยันตัวตนและก็ลงนามดิจิทัลผ่านโทรศัพท์มือถือนะคะก็เป็นอีกบริการหนึ่งนะคะที่สร้างความปลอดภัยและก็สร้างความสะดวกด้วยนะคะโอเค so do you have any questions
Sure. Yeah. You need to speak to microphone.
Let's just move back to electronic ID issue. Like my question is with the electronic ID initiative, like at the beginning of term, have you experienced a lot of false activities and how did the government solve that issue? And one more question, I just wonder, like you said, electronic ID is compulsory. Does that mean the Estonian citizen have mobile phone? Like all of them have mobile phone, and what if they doesn't have it? Like the government provide them a cell phone or not, something like that. Thank you.
Okay, no, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's again one of these kind of differences, right? So this is considered electronic. So if you just have a card, that's considered electronic. So you don't necessarily because you get PIN codes to log in and stuff like that, so you can validate. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a mobile phone, because you don't even have to have a computer, because you can, in theory, use this to go to a library, public library, and they have the ID card reader, and you can put it in there. So I think that's one of the things. When it comes to the use of the technology in the beginning, the electronic ID card, I think there have been more issues lately than in the beginning, because in the beginning, the technology itself was fairly novel. The system that was built and stuff like that was very unique. So you could use this, and basically it was working so that you had the card, but you needed to have the PIN codes, right? So, and we had been having the same system already with the PIN codes, with the bank accounts, with the online banking and stuff like that. So people were fairly aware of how to use it, right? So basically, there are two elements on the original card that are worth mentioning, right? So one is that it has the chip to log in and sign and stuff like that. But a lot of the systems that use data and stuff like that, they rely actually on your personal identification number, which has basically, it's like, I don't know, 9 digits or something, which is like sex, year of birth, month of birth, date of birth, and then unique 4 identifier. But that's not necessarily private information, because without a name, it doesn't mean nothing, right? So people could, in theory, get access to your data and look at it, but they wouldn't know who you are. Or even if, for example, if someone from government would log in with a login to the data set and look for it, there would be trace of that. And by law, we say that you are only allowed to look at the data that is necessary in your work. So if you spy on your neighbor, and as a civil servant to see how much money she has paid in taxes, or how many cars he or she has, you get fired, because you're breaching your obligations. The same way, actually, like if you think about office, you're not supposed to go to the archives and look up data on your boss or something like that if it's not needed for your work, right? So in that sense, it's a principle there. So I think we didn't have in the beginning that much. We have had lately more about the technology itself, right? So how long the chips work and whether they are compatible with the new technology and stuff like that. So I think it wasn't really that, because it's very separated. So you don't, if you log in, you don't, or if you get the card alone, you cannot do anything with it. It has a picture on it. You can put it to the computer, but you cannot log in without knowing the pins, right? If you get pins and stuff, of course that happens, but it can happen with everything, right? You can get the pin codes and access the bank and stuff like that. So there was not a lot of these things happening. So it was fairly kind of separated systems. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question is going to be related to her, but on e-residence. So e-residence, if I understand correctly, the concept is to draw, if I'm not mistaken, so draw foreign direct investment or even domestic investment, right, in the country without being present in Estonia. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How do you ensure? I mean, not you particularly, but the government. But how do we ensure that those firms or corporate obeying the law, complying with the law, and make sure they're not doing something fraudulent or even illegal activities. I think this is what people are afraid of being, hosting e-offices, I would say.
Fair question, fair topic. We had very big problems a few years ago with e-residence and Bitcoin. So Estonia became the kind of center of any kind of cryptocurrency operations because we allowed to set up companies and then they started to run this. So we actually closed that down quite quickly. We basically at some point we realized that it's a very critical kind of a topic. So the money laundering agency basically took away all the permits for operating and then looked at them one by one, what is good and what is not bad compared. But the statistics, at least, this is always the critique and it's a risk that you take into your government. And I think Estonian government has been very conscious about it. And their argument is that if you look at statistics, well, every individual, even Estonians, or even if they get Estonian permit, can become bad businessmen, right? So, but what we do is basically that you apply for the residency, you come to either an embassy. By now, it used to be that you had to go to Estonia once to get the documents. Now you can do it either in embassies or in some kind of service providers that government has to deal with. Probably, I think you can actually apply for becoming an e-resident in Bangkok without coming to Estonia by now. I'm not sure. But in some cases where we have embassies, it works like that. And then you submit the data and then the Estonian government basically does a check on you. And and as opposed to you being a citizen and you have rights, presumption of innocence and stuff like that. If it looks odd, if it looks fishy, we just don't give the permit. So the government does this background checks and stuff like that with certain experiences of bad and good habits. But I think this is a conscious risk that has been taken. And the main thing is that we don't give these rights to the companies, we gave them to the individuals. They need to do the tax reporting and all these things in Estonia. So they almost get a consultant or something like that. We have companies that host the residency. So you do all the advisories and stuff like that. So they are taught to report and do things like Estonians with legal advice and stuff like that. But there are cases, sometimes it's on walking on a knife edge, sometimes it's normal business risks and stuff like that, because you get with any FDI and stuff like that, or any foreign money that coming to a country, you might have this challenge.
Got it. So basically it's got to do with auditing and monitoring process that the government has to stick to.
So we have collaboration. So e-residence is managed by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, but the process of control includes also Ministry of Interior and other agencies that would actually sign off on the individuals. And there are some countries for which, by principle, permits are not given anymore. There are certain activities for which it's very much difficult to get. You need to prove your business beforehand and stuff like that. So it's a case-by-case analysis. It's not like automated system. We don't use AI there, I think.
Yeah. Definitely. So we have an audience from home have a question for you. So I'm going to ask her to unmute the mic and ask question. คุณจุธามาสวัสดีครับสามารถ unmute ไมค์แล้วก็พูดได้เลยนะครับ
สวัสดีค่ะ Tere. I have two questions. So based on my research, you have done like many publications about entrepreneurial state and innovation bureaucracies. Could you briefly explain the concept of an entrepreneurial state and its connection to innovation bureaucracy? And my second question is, in your view, what are key factors to effectively scale up public sector innovation for government-wide impact? Thank you.
Okay.
She's in Melbourne, by the way. So hello,
Sorry?
Melbourne.
Okay. Hello. Okay, so
Uh,
hello. Let's start from defining innovation bureaucracy. So you can also have a definition of digital innovation bureaucracy if you want to. But basically what we think about is that when we deal with topics like innovation or digital transformation, you have a mix of government organizations that contribute to that effort, right? So all of these organizations that one way or the other contribute to this innovation process, you can collectively combine these innovation bureaucracies. Because in all cases, when you think about innovations, which relates to the question also of scaling, innovation doesn't happen only through one agency that comes up with a new idea, but also the collaboration with other agencies, organizations that help scale or implement, right? So this all together is innovation bureaucracy that needs to kind of, let's say, contribute to the desired outcome, right? Now, why it's related to entrepreneurial state or what we are talking about is, if you think also about the example I gave about Estonian digital transformation, you could argue that the Estonian government in the digital sphere has been like an entrepreneurial state. What I mean by that is that the government that basically doesn't only focus on improving or innovation bureaucracy, doesn't only focus on improving certain services or certain processes in public administration, but has also a broader value proposition in mind, whether it's related to economic development, whether it's related to economic competitiveness, right? So the government actually takes a proactive stance through certain own activities. Normally, innovation policy domain, you're proactively developing technologies and stuff like that. And our idea or our kind of logic here is same as I mentioned, is that this innovation bureaucracy as such needs to have this stability-oriented long-term vision and understanding in mind. Why are we doing these things? Estonian e-residency as well. It's not about, oh, it's cool, let's try it. You need to have, in order exactly to deal with these dilemmas that you mentioned. What about risks of bad money and stuff like that? Why do we do e-residency? So there are 2 or 3 long-term ideas behind why do you do e-residency. One is you increase the usage of the services and earn some money in this process. But the second one is, as well, as a small country, you make it yourself bigger. Because especially if you are geopolitically influenced, being close to Russia, you are just 1.3 million people. But then our original idea was to have 10 million e-residents. But imagine if you have 1.3 million people, but there are 10 million people from the world who have business interest in your country. Then any kind of geopolitical tensions will have global impact or global view, right? So this is kind of, having this kind of long-term understanding. Why do you develop certain activities or initiatives? And why do you do innovation? So I think this is, the logic here. But the innovation bureaucracy element here is that you need to have both ability to test these things, but also the long-term vision and the scaling of things up. Now, when it comes to your last question, how do you scale government innovations? Then I think, innovation by definition is a novelty that is being implemented, right? If it's just a new idea that's not being implemented, then it's invention or some new idea. It becomes innovation if it's implemented to some extent successfully. Now, a lot of times public sector innovations suffer from this thing that we do innovation projects, we pilot it, and then we stop doing it, right? One of the main challenges is that, again, into the beginning of the process, you need to have this kind of long-term understanding of why are we doing this and are we ready or willing to implement this? If you don't include this in the original innovation projects and views, then you don't scale it, right? You only scale it when from the original point of view onwards, you take in, okay, we are going to test something new. If it's successful, what's our plan from next day? Oftentimes we just do it, let's test it, and then say, okay, this is a task of somebody else. But the idea of innovation bureaucracy is that you need to look at the testing and the scaling together and have this from the beginning through this long view, right? So, for example, we have, if you think about it, when you do an innovation pilot or experiment, this is normally that we focus on that to improve this process first, but that's not enough. You need to have this kind of readiness or willingness. So if you go into doing similar thing as e-residency, you need to have plan and resources that if this thing works, you have 7 first customers coming to Thailand to be e-Thais or something like that, then okay, that's innovation pilot. But do you have willingness, readiness, politically resources and stuff like that to scale that thing up? And in order to have that, you need to actually have a scaling organization in the beginning thinking, why are we doing this? That's why there is always this dilemma or challenge that you shouldn't just give all the tough stuff to innovation agencies, but innovation agencies should be very much connected to the traditional bureaucracy as well and work these things together. Yeah, I hope I answered to some extent that question.
มีคำถามเพิ่มเติมไหมครับน้องมิ้น
ไม่มีค่ะเรียบร้
โอ
อย
เค
ค่ะ
ค
ข
รั
อบคุณ
บ
ค่ะ
ขอบคุณมากนะครับ
ค่ะ
ท่านใดจากทางบ้านหรือว่าที่สำนักงานนะครับถ้ามีคำถามก็สามารถพิมพ์มาในแชทหรือว่าสามารถอันมิวไมค์แล้วก็ถามได้นะครับผม I have 2 questions left. Just one simple question you know best. I would love to ask you to clarify the concept of no legacy. I don't seem to get it. The second question is really open-end question. So with the rise of AI technologies, you probably experienced yourself with ChatGPT and the fellow students doing the plagiarism thing, but not necessarily on, looking into the public sector aspect. So should we be fearful? Should we be hopeful? Should we be concerned? So how should we feel about AI technology?
Mm-hmm.
So 2 questions, no legacy and AI technology.
Okay. So no legacy in principle means that if you think about how technologies evolve in private sector, then companies focus on building some kind of technology capabilities, right? And then once technological revolution happens, a new solution comes to the market or something like that, what happens with the old company? It goes bankrupt if it doesn't leave aside the technology and pick a new one and stuff like that. So basically in the market forces, you almost don't have legacies. You almost have the best solutions more or less on the market, except for large corporations and stuff like that. Public sector context is different. You cannot throw away stuff, right? You cannot stop doing services. You cannot stop doing products and stuff like that. You need to keep in mind that with this. But then you also have this thing that once you have established something, it tends to stay in the public sector, right? Whether it this is, you want to see legacy. This is Estonian legacy technology. We have built our systems on ID cards and stuff. We see that it's becoming useless, increasingly useless when new technological opportunities are there. And as long as we use it, it constrains us in our future development of new services and stuff. So in that sense, this is considered legacy, right? And the idea of no legacy principle is that you should build your system as much as possible on this idea that we don't get stuck or reliant on legacies. So we have always willingness or ability to come up with novel things, right? So we have tried to fix the legacy of this card with mobile ID, then with app-based ID. Now we do the M-app, put the ID card there and stuff like that. But you always try to bring in new stuff in order to not be only reliant on this, because this thing is very useful. 15 years ago, when people went to internet by computers. Nowadays, only civil servants go to internet by computers. Most kids don't have computers. They have iPads and they have phones. You cannot put this anywhere here, right? So you need a different version of logging. And the whole idea of no legacy is that you should always try to build the system of digital systems so that you are free of being stuck on things that might become obsolete, because in one day it becomes obsolete, your entire system collapses. So that's the no legacy principle. So in Estonia, this one former government CIO basically said, no legacy principle is that no code in your digital government system should be older than 13 years. Which basically means that you need to revise all of your government every 13 years to improve it, right? We don't adhere to that, but this is like an ideal, you look for it. So you constantly revise, renew, and renew, and you don't get stuck on something that is very kind of expensive and hard to get rid of. So that's, I hope I explained it a bit more. When it comes to AI, people should be cautiously pragmatic, I guess, right? So first of all, as I mentioned, AI has been, I think it's the fourth or fifth coming of AI. So original talks about the same logic of AI were 1950s, that AI will transform everything. We are again at this thing. If you look at it, what is happening in the AI community itself, it's very much about soul searching. I don't know if you remember, but last December, you know, the ChatGPT group itself had an internal turmoil because they didn't know how to go ahead. They fired Sam Altman because they don't know how to develop this technology, whether it should be corporate or open source and free, right? So we have very fundamental questions about this technology. I think that until now, there is always this kind of problem that in short term we overestimate its abilities. Students use it. If you have been professor for 10 years, you recognize when they use it. So experience helps you with this process and being calm and pragmatic about this. And oftentimes, if you put stuff in, like if you use AI solutions and stuff like that, Estonian government has this kind of challenge here. For example, we've been building AI systems in unemployment services. So the idea is there that the unemployment services, they want to upgrade them by having AI solutions help the consultants of unemployed people to offer better services. So based on the prior data and stuff like that, AI tries to predict whether a person is a highly employable, medium employable, or badly employable, to give like a color code of, you know, red, green, or whatever thing, right? But then the organization doesn't really know what to do with this data then. Do you just say no to the low employable people that don't come to our services because you're not going to get a job? Just go and cash in your unemployment benefits as long as you can, or you take them as your priority, right? So, and this is not AI doesn't give you the answer. AI gives you certain predictions whether the person is employable or not. But what do you do with this is up to you as a government agency, right? Should you focus then on the easily employables and get them to the labor market as fast as possible in order to generate tax revenue to pay more benefits to the low employables? Or should you actually rely on the highly employables surviving themselves on the market and use existing resources to focus on the badly employables and train them more? It's not the AI solution. That's policy choice that is based on values. How do you build your political system? What is the strategy of the government or vision of this government in this view? So I think it gives you help, but it doesn't solve you the problems the way we expect it to be solving the problems.
That's very thoughtful comment. Thank you very much. So before we end, let's take a photo.
Yeah.
To Zoom ผมขออนุญาตน้องเดียมีคำถามไหมครับ
ครับมีคำถามนิดนึงครับ
One more question or more if
Yeah. Good afternoon, Professor. I have a question about as I would like you to help me to explain something about the law. I would like to know that are there any problems related to law and regulation in Estonia that could be obstacle to becoming a digital government? Because nowadays, Thailand, we are facing this kind of problem in order to run the digital government in our country.
Yes and no. Estonian law is actually very counter innovation. Our legal system is German. What is not allowed is forbidden, more or less by legislation, which means that in theory, you should legislate everything you want to do. You should allow innovation in law, which is a very difficult thing to do because innovation is about uncertainty and stuff like that, right? You cannot say that, you know, you should allow this digital service if you don't know in the beginning whether it will work or not. So it's by principle, it's very constrictive and stuff like that. But Estonians are very good at hacking the law. So what it means is that as a small country and stuff like that, we had been very, very successful at interpreting law temporarily in a way that enables us to do some conscious experimentation. So I just give you one example, if I may. So for example, Estonia has been piloting self-driving cars on the streets for almost 10 years now. And Estonia at some point announced that it's legal in Estonia to pilot self-driving cars in live traffic. And actually, and in order to do that, we changed no laws. But we actually we found a loophole in the law which said that in Estonian regulation is very strict on saying that you can drive a car if you have a category B license and you're not drunk. But then there is an asterisk in the law that the same law applies also when the vehicle is moved from outside, which was meant that when your car is broken down and you push it on the street, you should have license and you should be sober, right? But then we agreed that, okay, but let's also say that that loophole temporarily applies also for operating self-driving vehicles, with the assumption that if the guy in the somewhere operations room in some company who has the joystick for the car has the category B license and is sober, then he can operate that car from the distance, right? So basically, suddenly, in order to have self-driving cars on the street, we needed to start employing IT experts with category B licenses. But this was like a temporary agreement that we'd interpret that this applies to that as well. And then once the technology felt safe enough and we understood it, only then we went to kind of allow it in the law, right? So by principle, the law would kind of forbid it. But we have been doing it quite a bit in some cases with kind of, let's say, creative interpretations of the law. And this is kind of, civil servants agreeing on their discretion that this is also the interpretation that applies to. In other cases, what we are trying to do is basically build what we call regulatory sandboxes nowadays, right? So this is the idea that for certain sectors, certain segments, we relieve us for certain legal blockings on this to enable to pilot so the technology works. So it's by formal legal standards, it's a huge block, but we've been able to kind of find ways to maneuver out of there. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you so much.
มีคำถามเพิ่มเติมไหมครับน้องเดียว
ไม่มีแล้วครับขอบ
โอ
คุ
เค
ณ
ค
มา
รั
ก
บได้ครับยังไงเดี๋ยวผมขอความร่วมมือผู้เข้าชมทางบ้านนะครับรบกวนขออนุญาตเปิดกล้องนิดนึงนะครับเดี๋ยวเราจะถ่ายรูปเก็บไว้เป็นที่ระลึกนะครับor maybe hop on okay alright นะครับถ้าใครสะดวกเปิดกล้องรบกวนถ่ายรูปเป็นที่ระลึกกันนิดนึงนะครับใช่เขากำลังเปิด Did you lock in? Oh, all right. That would work also. All right. ครับOkay, everyone smile, say cheese. Okay. สักครู่นะครับโอเคยิ้มค้างไว้นะครับยิ้มค้างไว้นะครับพร้อมนะครับ1 2 3ครับขอบคุณมากครับครับขอบคุณครับพี่จุ๋มพูดปิดอย่างนี้
Okay, so we are at the end of this session. So on behalf of the OPDC, I would like to convey our sincere thanks for your time and your presentations. We learned a lot from Estonians' experience, and for this time, it's not the first time for all of us. I think, I believe that we heard a lot, several times about Estonian case, but every time that we learn about Estonian case, we are so exciting. We are so excited to be like to be successful case, to be as a successful case as Estonian as well. But even we know that is
quite far away for the Thai government to catch up to follow the Estonian, but we try our best to follow your instruction. And thank you so much because our office, we put hard effort for the government transformation, especially for the digital transformation. So we learn a lot from you. Thank you so much and hope to see you again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for the very good questions.
ขอบพระคุณผู้ชมทางบ้านนะครับ เดี๋ยวกองฟอร์ไซต์ก็จะมีการนำเสนอเคสที่น่าสนใจจากต่างประเทศมาเรื่อยๆนะครับ ยังไงก็เดี๋ยวพบกันทางไลน์นะครับ ขอบคุณมากครับ วันนี้สวัสดีครับ
Recording stopped.